Not all musicians and bands are just making individual songs on a track list. Some are trying to make an overarching story or narrative to tie the music together to make one grand story or theme. Music nerds love them, and butt rock fans don't understand them. There are thousands of examples out there, and this video is going to look at 10 great concept albums. I asked both on the YouTube community page and on Twitter for examples, and I'm going to be talking about the 10 albums that kept showing up in people's suggestions. There were a ton, so I had to narrow it down somehow. This is not a top 10, no ranking, just a list. Also, one entry per band, as several bands on this list have several concept albums. This way we have a bit more variety on who we are talking about. You know how these videos work, let's get to it. Starting with an album that greatly grew on me over time, Nightwish and symphonic metal in general are no strangers to concept albums, and Imaginareum stands out as something meant to be a massive event, even by Nightwish standards. Coming out in 2011 and running 74.5 minutes, Imaginareum takes advantage of male and female vocals to add much more personality and characters to the story. Imaginareum follows an elderly composer reliving the events of his past before passing away. When you hear the different sounding tracks with varying energy and style, it should not flow as well as it does, but everything meshes and the presentation and massive sound in the big moments is outstanding. A film was made that expanded some of the characters and visuals with everyone in the band at the time taking part. There are many different metal styles representing in this album along with the symphonic elements. You never feel overwhelmed through all the music though, and along with that, the singing is fantastic. In the mid-2000s, I don't think many people expected the punk kids behind Basket Case to get super political, but wow did Green Day go in that direction. American Idiot in 2004 revitalized the band and made a new generation of Green Day fans. Iconic music that sparked an evolution in sound and style for the group, a perfect time capsule album for the mid-2000s, and a concept everyone understood at the time. American Idiot revolved around several ideas all relating to each other: post-9/11 America, the Iraqi War, and everything involving the Bush administration. Most of American Idiot is about that time where the youth and everyone was feeling uncertain about the future and no one knew what to do about it. American social dysfunction was the phrase used for describing it. Billy Joe Armstrong said that he hoped this album was written for that specific time, but also wanted it to be timeless with its statements. Musically, thematically, American Idiot still feels as relevant as ever. Not bad for a band that named one of their previous albums Dookie. That was a joke, by the way. Dookie is one of my all-time favorite albums. Calm down. One of the big names in prog metal, Dream Theater lived for long albums. Metropolis Part 2, Scenes from a Memory, is what you'd expect from Dream Theater in all the best ways, but this time adding Rudis on keyboards and adding a huge element in sound to the band. A concept album 77 minutes long across 11 tracks, several of which are over 10 minutes long, and earning a legion of metal fans in the process. Metropolis Part 2 features hypnosis, remembering a past life, coping with terrible actions, addictions, and more. It's a deeply layered story that's fleshed out to make you feel for the people involved. You understand the emotions and reactions from the characters, and the band nailed it with the performance and execution. Dream Theater has a legacy for concepts and long albums, and Dream Theater fans love to talk about which one is the best. Metropolis Part 2 has always been a crown gem for Dream Theater, and over 20 years later, it's still a favorite for prog and metal fans. Also, Mike Portnoy is still the man. A band known for making long progressive stories, Rush are heroes to Canada and stood untouchable for decades for being such a unique spectacle of a group. Of all the Rush albums people cherish, it was 2112 that arguably stands out the most. Centered around a 20-minute, 7-part title track, this was in many ways the worldwide breakthrough for Rush and put the band in another galaxy. 2112 focuses on another planet where creativity, original thought, and all music are outlawed to the point of extinction. By the year 2112, a man finds a beaten guitar and discovers the lost art of music. And it's all a huge, overblown, overdramatic, and undeniably awesome sound all the way to the ending. The second half of the album is not as dour, where more traditional Rush songs would come out, but what people talk about the most is the futuristic and awful world told in the story of 2112. While this was before my generation, this was the planetarium light show experience that had a lot of low-life rock and roll fans lose their mind to. Emo kids were never the same once they heard The Black Parade. My Chemical Romance not only proved they were a band worth remembering, but also proved they knew how to make a story out of their music. In 2006, The Black Parade was released along with the band diving deep into the gimmick and giving a style and visual representation, even if it's remembered for a few opening piano notes. A rock opera about the patient, a man dying and then being presented his fondest memories of the past. The Black Parade represents the event of death and dying in a much different way, and Gerard Way wanted to make an album that would be passed down through generations. 51 minutes of sing-alongs, sadness, screaming, and understanding the many sides of the great beyond. An album that helped define a generation of rock fans in the mid-2000s, and I feel this is something that the elder emos can play for their future children, where their kids will not think mom and pop emo are that lame anymore. My personal favorite Iron Maiden album, and I'm glad the suggestions pointed to this Maiden selection. Seventh Son of a Seventh Son from 1988 was the album that helped reinvigorate Bruce Dickinson's love for performing with Iron Maiden, as this concept album was another in the fight between good and evil, but with a unique twist on an old folklore tale with that heavy metal Iron Maiden shine we all love. Seventh Son of a Seventh Son is about a boy born with the ability to see the future and who is seen as a threat and dangerous by the people around him. This concept of the son who was viewed as a curse to his village and those around him was a big twist on the seventh son concept, which is normally seen as a positive thing for a child. Iron Maiden put more weight into this concept metal album without the stock dragons and sword fights that had become cliche at the time. At just under 44 minutes and including keyboards for the first time, Seventh Son was where Iron Maiden elevated themselves once again and proved how they are legends. One of my all-time favorite albums that proved just how wildly talented Maynard James Keenan can be outside of Tool. Working with Billy Howardell in A Perfect Circle, 13th Step from 2003 blew my 16-year-old mind when I first heard it. 50 minutes across 12 tracks, this was a big undertaking that is equal parts beautiful, angry, and harrowing. All styles A Perfect Circle are great at expressing. An album written about addiction, not to a specific substance even, just the thoughts, pull, and cycle of addiction itself. Maynard said years ago in an interview that you can be addicted to falling in love, and it will consume you. When you think about addiction itself and what it does, and while you listen to this album, it really hits home harder when you hear the anger, the bliss, and all the tragedy and desperation in the excellent music. I feel 13th Step was not only the final proof that A Perfect Circle was not just a side project, but also that a concept album on just an idea can hold a lot of weight. I still listen to it almost 20 years later. Another band who are heralded when talking about concept albums. I put a side poll on Twitter asking which Opeth album to choose from, and Still Life from 1999 won. I understand why. This was metal and melody, sadness and revenge, and a massive amount of skill in a progressive showing. Over an hour of many speeds and style that prove Opeth could make a story and sound however they wanted. A story about a man who was removed from his hometown for not believing in a shared faith. His return to that town to see the love of his life, and chaos ensuing. It's not so much anti-Christian or anti-religious as it is about an outcast and his adventures. When you talk about technical skill and writing, Still Life should be looked at with admiration. There was so much involved to make each song sound different, but from a variety of instruments to the vocal tones. And I understand Opeth fans have long debates over which one is the best, but when it comes to concept albums, Still Life is fantastic. From Creep to Paranoid Android, Radiohead broke their own mold when diving into the world of conceptual music, and I truly feel they are better off for doing it. OK Computer from 1997 was a gamble with some massively different recording process to get all the sounds and music they wanted in the right form, but it couldn't be any other way to tell a story about our use of technology. OK Computer at an overhead view is about the dependency of technology and how it eventually makes us all isolated, paranoid, and insane. This was meant as a futuristic album from 1997. Looking at how I cannot go anywhere without my phone that can instantly detach me from any human contact, yeah, Radiohead was onto something. Ahead of its time, digitally and electronically serene, Radiohead were able to detach from the 90s alternative sound and make something wildly different from OK Computer onward. One of the best albums Radiohead ever created, and an album from the 90s that still works today. I feel the best example of a concept album would be with The Wall. At the end of 1979, Pink Floyd continued their massive streak of amazing albums with possibly their most synonymous story of all, The Wall. I make that argument because while many people have their favorite Pink Floyd album, it's The Wall that stands out the most as a concept album for the story and message being portrayed. A rock opera featuring a bitter rock star who is looking back at his life, isolated by terrible events, and building a wall of traumatic memories to make himself more and more closed off. And there is much, much more I won't have time to discuss in such a short synopsis in one of the best albums ever, not just concept albums. Much of Roger Waters' creativity and own personal experiences feeding into the fictional rock star are so easy to connect with, and the movie made a few years after the album only drove The Wall to another level of fame and permanent spot in pop culture. You will never hear me argue which album from Pink Floyd should be your favorite or which one is the best, but I will always stand by that everyone should hear The Wall in full and see the movie if you can. There are concept albums, and then there are concept albums by Pink Floyd. And that was a look at 10 great concept albums. Know of another? There are many more out there that I didn't have time to discuss. Leave a comment and let everyone know. Big thanks to my patrons and a special thanks to Chris Doman and Dom Noble. You can have a say in upcoming videos, get weekly new music playlists, and see videos early by supporting Rocked on Patreon. Please support the channel by clicking on the link in the video description. Please subscribe and ring the bell to get notified of upcoming videos, and you can keep up to date with Rocked on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. For those wondering why only 10, because people stop watching after a certain point of any video. I can't make an hour-long video on this subject. So that's why I can only do 10. Might make a part 2 of this someday if people show enough interest though.